Here is part 4 of going through the president's cabinet, going through their roles, and this is perfect timing because Trump just released this cabinet pick. So next on the list is Secretary of Defense. And Trump announced last night that he picked Pete Hegseth as his secretary. Before we get into more about him, let's go through what this role entails. Honestly, I don't think I need to drag this one on. The Secretary of Defense really just commands the branches of the military. They are second in command to the president, who is the commander-in-chief. Now, I do want to note that there is a Secretary of Veterans Affairs, so that is a separate role. This position also manages the Pentagon, and as we know, they never pass an audit. We definitely need someone in this role who has good management skills. And just a fun fact, before 1947, the role was actually called the Secretary of War. In Trump's first term, he had 4 secretaries of defense. Yeah, he had very high turnover in his first cabinet in general. The current secretary is Lloyd Austin III, and he is the very first African American in the role. There's also never been a female in this position. Now let's learn more about Pete. If you want to learn about him, he actually did this podcast just like 5 days ago. Please go watch it. Out of all the research I've done, I've only seen one baby red flag, but not a big red flag. Now, ever since 2014, he has worked for Fox News. A lot of people have a problem with this, but I don't, and let me tell you why. Any of the secretaries, any of the cabinet picks, are basically PR people for that department. They are often on the news, in press releases, and in Congress testifying. But that's not only what he's done with his life. He has a very long history of being in the military. And if you listen to this podcast, he says he actually wrote a couple books all about veteran affairs. And I was actually really impressed listening to him because he said that he talked to a lot of veterans to write those books. Actually, it's funny because I think he would actually be a good fit for the Secretary of Veteran Affairs. Watch this clip because this gives me hope that he's the right man for the job.
27, I was under consideration by Trump to be his VA secretary.
Nice.
I was interviewed multiple times. In fact, I was down to the final 2. And, go up to Trump Tower, up the elevator, sit with him, talk about it. And ultimately, I think he thought I was a little young and all that. But I remember he called me at one point in the process, and he said, Pete, I want to pick you. I want to pick you, but there's one problem. Why do all the veterans groups hate you? And I sort of laughed. And he goes, no, but they hate you. And I'm like, well, Mr. President, let me tell you why. Because outside the box thinking of, say, providing private choice for veterans is a threat, complete threat to the ecosystem around the government bureaucracy and the VA and the veterans groups. They exist to defend their territory. And they'll say, oh, it's for the betterment of the vets. Well, what if vets are getting better treatment from non-conventional places? Why aren't we exploring that? Well, the bureaucracy can't handle that. Well, it's not the existing system. It's not where most of the money comes from. It doesn't support the bricks and mortar facilities that they want to keep. The importance becomes keeping the facilities as opposed to what is the treatment that the vets are getting. So I had I had overwhelming support from veterans across the country who were who believed that Veterans Choice would unshackle them from driving 400 miles for a basic treatment when they could get it 10 miles from their house and the government pays for it. Or the idea that if you're abusing a vet, a VA official should be fired. So the solutions are simple. It's choice and accountability. Vets have choice, and people that aren't doing their job or doing it poorly get fired. But government doesn't do either of those things.
I don't know. I think it's a good thing if you're pissing off some bureaucrats, but it sounds like he is very passionate about veteran issues. Now, I will say there are people on the right that are really praising him because in that podcast, he talks about how women shouldn't be in combat. So a lot of Republicans are praising him that he's going to get rid of wokeness in the military. But I do want to give a balanced perspective. This is also what he said in the podcast regarding the subject.
And as the disclaimer for everybody out there, and I'm not really in the disclaimer business, we've all served with women and they're great. Mm-hmm. It just, our institutions don't have to incentivize that in places where not traditionally, over human history, men in those positions are more capable.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue. I think women, I have to give my opinion here, I guess. I think women do have a place in combat if they want it. I think there are certain units that they need to stay out of or create their own. because when you said it gets complicated, yeah, it does get complicated, man.
They go on to describe exactly why it gets complicated. But I highly encourage you to watch that podcast to get a balanced perspective. I really don't think it's as simple as the left saying it's discrimination and the right saying we're going to end wokeness. I did come across this article that says that the Pentagon is stunned about Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense. That's probably a good sign. Now, on to that baby red flag I talked about. So Pete Hegseth, he was the chief executive of Concerned Veterans for America, a group funded by the Koch brothers. I'm not going to get into detail about who the Koch brothers are, but they're not the best people. But he did leave this group in 2015. And just as your final fun fact, a Secretary of Defense has to be a civilian or someone that has been out of active duty for 7 years. I would love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense? And of course, make sure you're following me for more.